Hi, this is Professor Laney with Intro to Special Needs class, Chapter 3, Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Learners. So we're jumping into the PowerPoint and we're talking, we actually watched the video from Sonia Nieto and she's talking about diversity in the classroom. To me, it's a blessing. And maybe, again, I understand what I look like, I understand who I am, I understand that I am a white woman saying diversity is a blessing. Again, I grew up with Title IX schools. It's just what I choose. I'm glad that my child is mixed race. That is actually energetically very accurate to who I am. We did know that perhaps adopting a Black child, we maybe couldn't give them the culture that they perhaps needed. Recently, I've reached out to Big Brothers of Orange County and Hunter Blackman to find a mentor for him. He's finally identifying as mixed, and but he does really like cool guys with cool hair. You know, he's 14 now, so it's trying to get him to get his culture to come to him, because he's part of so many different cultures. I call him the SoCal special, right? He's white and Black and Hispanic, and it's but he's being raised by two white people. So we've come up across some interesting pieces when it has to do with consideration for the special education program. So let's keep going. Again, there are different states that have different ideas about special education. And even in one state, there's different administrations and different money that goes to certain places, and different teachers who have different philosophies, and teachers who do a good job and teachers who don't really do a good job. Remember, anytime you see an equal sign, that is a definition. That's a great way to clue into your outline that like get that in there, right? You may have heard some of these terms lately in the last few months about nativism and how you know, America's the best, and you know, it's USA all the way. We are, like Sonia Nieto said, we are multicultural, we are multilinguistic, and to say that there is one way, no, every white person came from somewhere. Every white person came from somewhere. And again, I'm not sure if I shared this with you guys before. My grandparents were not born here, so I'm second generation. People go, "Oh, you're white. You must have came over on the Mayflower." No, plenty of families, plenty of people, plenty of students. Their families have been here for 7, 8, 12 generations, and here's me, like, brand speaking new. But I'm white. I must be been here since, you know, the Oregon days, the Oregon Trail days. No, my family's new. My family's new to the country. And my grandparents didn't speak English, and my parents wanted to hide their native language, right? And then the third generation usually tries to like bring some of it back and whatnot. So it's really kind of interesting. So again, nativism means like saying like the native people, which in our country is so backwards because we don't even like. By the way, naming Indigenous people Native Americans is like whitewashing them too. By the way, so I think the most preferred term is called First Nation people, and so I'd rather put that. So nativism is saying that people who are here first, which white people claim to be here first, but we're not. Nativism is like it's all about us and we're the best and this, that, and there's only one way. It's very one-sided and dogmatic, and it's not realistic. But you're going to see a lot of people who have that mentality. It breaks my heart, but you're never going to convince people otherwise. And we're going to keep going. We'll talk more about that. Melting pot is, well, that concept is when we all come together, and we come together, we actually make something new. I prefer the term cultural pluralism. Cultural pluralism says there's a huge Vietnamese population, and there's a huge Russian population, and there's little Italy, and there's little Saigon, there's all these different places, and you have a Tet festival, and you have a gay pride parade, and you do Eid, and you do like Women's History Month. It's all of us in our little pockets doing our thing, and everybody else can join in if you want, right? I live in Tustin, Santa Ana. We have 7 Indian food restaurants, and they're no joke. Otherwise, you got to drive all the way to Cerritos for some good stuff. But what I'm saying is, like, cultural pluralism allows people to be their culture in little pockets, and at the same time, part of the dominant society. When I worked at Irvine, when I was teaching at Irvine, I actually really enjoyed, there was a larger Middle Eastern population of students there. And I really loved seeing hijabs and like Abercrombie stuff. I was like, that shows you 100% cultural pluralism. You do you, boo, but yeah, you need your Abercrombie leg stuff. I get it. That's great. I'm all about it. But how do we maintain that in the special education realm? there's a lot there. So here's our racial and ethnic composition, and this is almost 10 years old, which is crazy. This is just American school children. So about half are white. Now in Southern California, it's less than half, right? Just because we're in that part of the world. And if you want to go to the Dakotas, you're going to have a little bit more than half, right? But you're also going to have more like First Nation people there, right? 25% Hispanic, 15% African American, 5% Asian. And this last 5% is 2 or more races, which is my child, 1% first world people, and 0.5% or less than 0.5% is Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. And they don't even like the term Hawaiian either. We put our name on other people and we don't really ask them. So, and we're hopefully going to change those things, hopefully. So this is general. This is the general data. And this is from the National Education Center of Statistics. Now, I jumped ahead, sorry. How diverse are students, right? Now, again, that was your graphic right there. Now, we use a term called ELL or ELs, right? English language or English learners. English language learners or English learners. About 10% of this entire pie chart is going to be an English language learner, whether they're maybe Hispanic or Asian, about 10% of this pie. If we could do an overlay or take off the top slice, then 10% of that would be English language learners. We are developing an English, a language and literacy certificate here by next year, which I'm really, really excited. The majority of English language learners speak Spanish. Nearly 170 different languages are spoken in New York city schools. 170 different languages in one school district. That's the largest school district. You guys know Orange is like the 7th largest school district in America? Orange, Unified. Wow. How do they do with special education? Peyton's first attorney said they lawyer up fast and they lawyer up hard. I can tell you right now, Tustin has been sued a lot and they do not do a very good job. That's obviously my opinion. But there's been multiple balls being dropped in the Tustin Unified School District for special education. Again, Peyton's at a special school now. They pay, it's $15,000 a year for the school district to pay for Peyton to go to the school. I ain't paying for that. It's not my fault that they can't educate him in his home school. We'll talk more about that with chapter 4. So yeah, it's basically the equivalent of Chapman College that he goes to. And he might not make it there either. I'll talk more about that. So again, in the United States, I didn't get the right legend in here. I am going to have to find better statistics here because as purple says, 50 to 75% of students are, I don't know. Then New Mexico, 75 to 92% are. Green is 25 to 57. Interesting. I did not. Always cite your sources, people, or get a better source. I will update that. There is a lot of equity issues in special education. I was trying to say that nicely before. There are a lot of it. So students from racially and ethnically, culturally, and linguistically diverse backgrounds perform as well as those from the dominant culture. Historically, there is a shared culture with a dominant culture, and sometimes cultures within that, maybe I'd call them alt cultures, because I don't want to call them subcultures. That doesn't mean they're sub, doesn't mean they're less than. Alt cultures don't know the same thing that white cultures do. Like, I think just little things like Santa Claus wears a red suit. Well, by the way, he didn't wear a red suit until 1950 something, thanks to the Coca-Cola company. Things like Coca-Cola, original formulation of Coca-Cola actually had cocaine in it. You know, there's a lot of things that people who were not acculturated in this dominant society or fit into the dominant society are going to know. And when we talk about IQ tests, we'll talk a little bit more about how IQ tests are culturally saturated, meaning the questions that come from that go into an IQ test can typically be understood by people of Caucasian descent. On an IQ test, there's 12 different subsets, and you do like one with like moving blocks around, one where you know, like airplane is to paper as rock is to, you know, that kind of stuff, the SAT business. There's 12 little mini tests in there. But there's one subset that's a trivia question. There are trivia questions like, what's the general population of the world right now? Do you guys know? Just guess. Ballpark. Without looking it up. Let's see what we got down here. Let's see what I have. Damn lot. That's for it. It's about 7.5 billion. Yeah, 7.5 billion people. Yeah, there we go. Woohoo! 7.5 billion. Number one highly populated country in the world. Anyone? Most highly populated country in the whole world. Julia's like, I'm gonna look it up. It's easy. You guys got this one, China. That's right. Number two. India. Yeah. No, not America. India. India has more people in a smaller footprint. Yeah. So there's a lot of different things. So I'm not saying if you don't know that you're not, your IQ is not high. It's not. But these are questions. Some of the questions are, you know, who's the 15th president of the United States? Who wrote Faust? If you weren't raised here and you didn't know American history, you would know the 15th president of the United States. And if you weren't right. America's crowded, but we ain't that crowded. Seriously, it's wild. And Faust is a 16th century German literary piece by Goethe. Who the hell knows that? Because I have a German heritage, so yeah, I know that kind of stuff. It's like, but why would a 10-year-old student who grew up in rural Tennessee know that, or a student of color know that? So there's a lot of, so it's been changing, obviously, and so our criteria for evaluation is different. So again, it's kind of a rhetorical question. It's hard. We like to say equality, but equality is like a chasing smoke, chasing a shooting star. You know, it's like there's a theory and then there's a practice, and sadly, it's really inequitable in the special needs industry. And we talk here about food insecurity, and I'm sure you guys are aware of that, but if you're not, food insecurity is where people don't necessarily have enough food to have 3 meals a day, or at least eat healthy food. And so that typically shows up in historically disadvantaged communities. However, due to COVID, we've seen a change in that as well, where even like your nuclear white family is still having some food insecurity issues. I mean, if both parents lost their jobs, like what's going on, right? So there's a lot of different things going on here, but let's get into the special ed piece. But we talked about differences of spending. Different districts have different monies, and sometimes the money comes in from nonprofits. Sometimes it comes in from the state, comes in the feds, and certain ones are earmarked for books. They're earmarked for facilities, and they're earmarked for salaries and things like that. So, and sometimes it's technology. I know in Tustin there is actually an oversight committee just to make sure that the technology money is being spent properly. That means you have people who have money to spend in technology, but then we need a committee to oversight, meaning like babysitters. You ever hear the word oversight committee? That's what that means. And I'm not saying that people are doing anything wrong with the money. However, if you put all the money in the theater program, and the theater program is historically white students, right? Or you put the money in the AV department, or AV equipment, or CAD, drawing, anything like that. So you might have more male students who take those things. So anytime the money is federally earmarked or comes from the federal government, it has to be managed properly. So that's why you'll hear things like Title IX. You know, back in the 70s, they were talking about all the sports money was going to the boys' sports. It needs to equally go to boys and girls' sports. And that's just part of it. So now again, Brown versus the Board of Education. Whew. You guys remember Brown versus the Board of Education, right? I'm getting the chilly willies. Brown versus the Board of Education was out of Topeka, Kansas. And by the way, when there is I'm getting the chilly willies again. When there is a federal statute that the Supreme Court has to rule on, it usually is standing on the top, the shoulders of something that came up through the states. So if there's inequality that comes up through a state, and then like the state government says, well, this needs to be this way, then the federal government can say, hey, over here in this state, this is what they determine. And if they determine that, that needs to be the same for all the states. So like think of gay marriage. If one state determined it is unconstitutional to withhold marriage from one group of people based on any sort of affordance, cannot be discriminated against, can't be taken away from a group because they're in that group. That our country is built on that equality piece. However, that's what we say we do, that's what we do that we do, but sometimes it goes sideways. Let's start there. However, Brown versus the Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, stated that all people deserve an education. All people deserve an education. Now to us, we're just like, yeah, totally, all people deserve education. They literally meant students of color. And where did they get that from? Oh, did they get that from Santa Ana, California, and the Mendez family that sued the Garden Grove School District? Yeah. Brown versus the Board of Education, that's why I'm getting the chilly willies, that creates equality in schools, started here. Why do you think our library is called Lorenzo A. Mendez? Why is there 5 schools in Santa Ana called Mendez School? The Mendez family, and I'm getting this totally wrong, and there is a documentary and I could share it with you. The Mendez family back in, I want to say World War II era, they took over some farms that were here. And it was, I think, some of the farmers here, there's Japanese farmers here who were being interred in like Arizona and New Mexico and things like that, meaning like they are pulled out of their homes and put in little mini American concentration camps. Not that we killed them, but we kept them separate because, you know, the Japanese were part of World War II. And so the Mendez family said, we'll work your lands, and when you come back, we'll just give them back. That's awesome, right? Also, the Mendez family, they called in all of their family from, you know, the local area, like Central Valley, like, you know, New Mexico, Arizona, and they said, hey, come work the land. So now you have like, I think 4 different families living in kind of one area trying to work the land. Now they all brought their kids with them. And they took their kids to the local school, which is in the Garden Grove School District, and said, these are our children, please educate them. And the Garden Grove School District said, but they're Mexican. Mexicans don't need an education. Went to Orange County Court, went to California Supreme Court, and nope, you cannot discriminate based on race or ethnicity. Not at all. So then somebody picked up the clue on that in Kansas and said, it can't be one way in California, it has to be the way for all of us. And just the same as gay marriage, boom, our entire country has it. Yeah. So what? I'll share, I'm gonna write this down here, Mendez family. Did anybody, have you guys ever heard that story before? You guys know about that one? We are like the quiet foundation of all of America's #1 educational policy. Wild, mind-blowing. And let's put this in perspective. So I'm 3.5 years in, right, to this job here, and my boss is Black, African-American woman, and she grew up in the 60s. She actually graduated, I think, the college in, I don't remember exactly, but she told me she lived in the South when she was a girl, and she was in a segregated school till she was 9. Now, I think she's 70, so do the math, 1950. So until about 1959, she was in a segregated school. Now, the 59 seemed like a long time ago, but really that's 1960-ish, right? That doesn't seem too long ago. Well, maybe it is, but hey, wait a minute. I was born in the 70s, so that was only like 10 years before. 10 years before I was born, people were going to segregated schools. I forgot the year of Brown versus Board. And next week, We actually have an embedded video from my son's first attorney, who actually is a Santa Ana College professor, and she will talk about the legislation she'll talk more about the legislation later. But holy cow, you cannot separate. And by the way, the Brown versus the Board of Education was even the other foundation for the 504 and IDEA. Do you see how we stand on the shoulders of giants as we move forward? And again, there's a lot of legislation. I have the current legislation, the proposals for California. I have them all. I'm looking at what the educational system's looking like, and it's going to change. COVID really poked holes in what is not working in our educational system, especially early childhood education is going to change a lot. And I'm really, really excited that I'm here. I'm like on my surfboard. I'm seeing a wave that could be forming. I'm starting to turn around, right? I'm getting ready. I'm getting ready. We should all be ready. You guys are going to be teachers in this new era. And I'm really, really excited for you guys. And again, just because you're taking this class doesn't mean you have to be a special education teacher. I might even talk you out of it. We need gen ed teachers with their head on straight, that understand diversity, that understand executive dysfunction, that understand kids who need a sensory break, who understand that this kid is totally okay in a gen ed class, except for maybe this little part of this child, right? Their social emotional might be behind, but that doesn't mean that they go into an entirely different program. So let's keep going. And again, look up these terms here. We know what AP classes are. Advanced placement, that means on top of the curriculum or a more advanced curriculum. Opportunity gap, oof. It's that piece where people are just expected to have an opportunity, and then the other people who want that opportunity are always trying to catch up with that. I do a really cool activity in class, but I obviously can't do it here. But again, this could be your deep dive. If this is something you want to learn more about, go for it. Just put it in TED Talk or TED Ed and see what comes up. Equal education and equitable education. We cannot teach every single person the same. This is why I'm in college. This is why I do this, because I put a syllabus together and I also give you guys your way of doing things. It's kind of like I give you a framework, but you can be you inside of that. Public school doesn't always do that, right? So equal education is expecting everybody to have, I'm giving you all the equal information and you guys have to do everything exactly the same, and it doesn't exactly work. We try to use the term equitable education. It means what is necessary. Here, I'm going to jump ahead. What is necessary for people to succeed might be different. Equality is giving people the same thing, and equity is fairness in every situation. So I don't even know if you've guys heard, so again, it's Women's History Month. We're going to talk about, we talk about the terms of women's equality, but technically it might need to be more of the conversation of equity. And it is turning that way. So again, let me go back to 10, but there's so much in here. So listen, so back in here, equality means we're giving everybody the same tool. Everybody gets the same iPad. Everybody gets the same ruler. Everybody gets the same desk. Everybody gets the same folder. Everybody gets the same book, right? But that doesn't mean that kid can understand the book, or that kid can actually read the book, or that kid can actually read, or, again, it's looking at the privilege of neurotypicalness. And there is a lot of ableism, meaning people who are able, they get everything they want, or it's just life comes easy to them. Have you met those people? They just don't have to work hard at stuff, and they might not be super smart, but things just show up for them. I was watching a TikTok video where one girl was like, I'm going to go ahead and just start acting like my male coworkers. And some guy quit or got fired, and she goes, I knew I wasn't qualified for that job, but I just said, hey boss, I want that job. And the boss said, great initiative, it's yours. Right? There's some people who just do that. I have friends who are just so out loud and proud, and oh, I just felt like going skydiving. Oh, and while I was there, I asked them for a discount, I got one. And it's like, what is happening? And sometimes that is afforded to certain people, typically neurotypical people. And then equity means maybe this person doesn't need extra supports, and maybe this person needs extra time on a test, and this person needs extra time on a test and a screen reader or a scribe, someone to write it for them. It's wild, and I really try to hammer this at home. You don't get extra. Equity isn't extra. Equity is fairness. I have a kid who's got a lot of deficits and a massive self-esteem. So yeah, I did that. That's my fault. I literally typed it in an email today. I wish he didn't have the ego bigger than his 93 pounds could carry. That's the truth, right? This kid is not wanting for self-esteem, but he's not understanding how life works quite yet. And that's, again, teenagerness, but at the same time, it's like, oof. So again, here's this piece about high expectations and low expectations. And maybe you guys ran into that in high school. Did you know that I can change the grade of a test in this class by just telling you guys I have high expectations and saying I believe in you? I can do that because a teacher's concept of a student actually changes the dynamic. And you may have even had it in college where the teacher goes, oh, the average score on my first test is an F, right? Astronomy, physics, anatomy, professor. Like I've heard horror stories, right? But I'm also the person who like says, okay, really, that's what you think you got on me? I'm out. I'm like, I'm gonna bust out. I'll bust that buster, right? And so teachers with high expectation, and we're not saying developmentally inappropriate expectations. Listen, my kid is 14. He's like, oh, I shouldn't have to do chores, really, says every teenager. I'm like, my leg's broken, right? So we're trying to put together, like, what is he able to do? Is he able to walk the dog? Yes. But is he able to walk the dog alone? No. Because if somebody walks by and says, hey, hop in this car, I'll give you $10 and I'll be your friend, he might be gone. That's where that autism piece kicks in. That part of society he just doesn't understand, just does not understand. So again, teachers with high expectations ask a lot of questions, give different time, give different ways for students to represent themselves. And again, I was one of these students who I was like, yeah, I see your assignment and I could do it, but I'd rather do it this way. And some teachers were open for that. It was my advanced teacher, my AP classes were a little bit more open for open formats because I'm a little bit more artistic and I like to put stuff like that, or I would do like a little skit or a play, or I'd sing. The very first time I ran into something, it was like we were doing poems and it was 8th grade. It's about Peyton's age. And the teacher was like, oh, you have to come up here and perform or like say your favorite poem. And I said, it's okay if I sing it. She's like, I don't see why not. So that was kind of a breaking point for me, that I was like, hey, wait a minute, we can do stuff, but we can do it better. We can do it differently. We can do it uniquely. So teachers with high expectations can still be in the special education program. And that's what we're asking, right? These are a little bit old statistics, but these achievement gaps in parental education and socioeconomic, these are killing me right now. Okay, so in the top, achievement gap by race. So our white students scored 275. I guess this is on reading. Yeah, this is on reading scores. Our Asian Pacific Islanders scored higher. Maybe they're native speakers, maybe they're not. Remember, the bilingual brain is always smarter, always smarter, always smarter, right? And culturally, you have Asian and Pacific Islanders culture who pushes for excellence. These are kids who do something before school, go to school, and then go to like 2 other things after school, including maybe Vietnamese classes, church classes, violin, taekwondo, whatever. Hyper scheduled kids. I see that more in like the Asian Pacific Islander community than I do in the white community, but there's still a lot of it in the white community. This lowest score here it's about the same, just a slightly lower as African American than First Nation people. Hispanic and Latino a little bit though. So achieving 8th grade reading scores. Interesting. Achievement gap parental education. 8th grade reading scores by parental education. Whew. If your parents did not finish high school by the 8th grade, your reading scores were low. Graduated high school, some education, and graduated college. Again, my kid has all the words. I tell people nature versus nurture. He does not look like me, does not share my genetics. We all have different blood types in this family, but he has my mouth. Literally today in teacher conferences, well, he has all the words. Let's give him the opportunity to use the right words in the right situation. He does have all the words. So fun. Let me go back one more, back to this one. And okay, PowerPoint, I get it. Now this one. Now, based on achievement gap, socioeconomic level based on eligibility for free and reduced lunch. 8th grade. By 8th grade, the people who, let's see if I can get it down here. See if I can get a little bit more down here. No. Here's Mendez. I jumped ahead. The people who did not finish high school, this is the green one, got the free lunch. The people who graduated high school got reduced price, and the people who are not eligible graduated college. But I know white families who got it. So it's one of these things, but it has to do with education as a cultural piece, right? We went here between equality and equity. This is a great one, honestly. I've used this one so much. This is really good. There's another one with like grabbing apples, another image of that. Whew, these are the landmark court cases. I do believe I have one question on this one. Okay. And then this one here, Larry P. Rowell's culturally based testing. This is the one I talked about with the IQ test. They basically said it was like 95% of the Black children or African-American children taking the standardized IQ test would fail it. And then they would put those students immediately in special education. Is it possible that they all failed it? Yeah. Is it possible there's something wrong with the test? Yeah, you bet. And here's the thing. In the state of California, it is illegal to give an IQ test to a child of African-American descent. Trust me. We walked him into his SDT preschool to get him assessed, and I handed him the paperwork that said Mexican and white, and they were like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Well, that's what the birth mom told us." But I do have pictures of his brothers, and none of his brothers have curly hair. So we are just going off that assumption. And yes, we're just going off that assumption. And they made me change the paperwork. And I was like, is this a funding issue? She was like, no, it's illegal if we blah, blah, blah. I was like, fine. So fast forward to the age of 7, and I got him an IQ test at Kaiser because you get some private company and I pay for that, right? And 2.5 hours later, my kid walks out of the room going, that was fun. Now, I was making sure, I literally wanted to make sure, and I knew his IQ wasn't low in a danger zone, like, because he's like too smart for his own good. But it's not even that high. It's like a little above average, but it's not super high. So again, it is wrong to place students who have no disabilities in special education. That is the long and the short of it. We'll talk more about that. So, and again, here's Mendez versus Westminster. Well, I said Garden Grove, but it's Westminster. The precedent case for Brown versus Board of Education. Yeah, I got the Chili Willies. Hoover's School, first grade class of 1944. Look at that. Hoover Elementary. This was the first year Mexican children were allowed to have an education, and they look thrilled. Actually, there's a couple that he's like, yeah, I can just sit in school. I don't have to be at home because then we don't have Xbox, right? And they're in their Sunday finest and whatnot. That's fantastic. This was a hand-me-down dress because it's a little short. I get it, or she just went through growth spurt, right? But I'm going to encourage you guys to follow this link because I want to make sure that we cover a few things here. I talked a little bit more about it, but yeah, even right across from Santa Ana College, there's that Target right across the street, and behind there's a Mendez Fundamental School. Really excited. Ooh, disproportionality. Okay, so if we talked about any given school population, you guys remember, and I asked you guys this before, and maybe you were here, maybe you weren't. Let's do this. What is your, like the high school that you went to, what was the actual population? I went to Valencia, we had 2,000 students in 4 grades. What did you guys have? Do you guys remember? I guess. Yeah, no, he's like, I blocked it out. Gio's like, I do not remember. Where'd you go, Gio? Did you say you went to El Dorado? Where'd you go? Yeah, Sarah, 2,500. Yeah, Villa Park in Orange. I think they're, yeah, let's just say for argument's sake, 2,000, just for math's sake, right? So that means that in each class, let me pull it right here. In each class, there was about 500 students. I remember that because I was like the 8th grade vice president and freshman class president. Shocking, right? But this is how I know this stuff. So roughly like this: if 10% of any population or any class is identified needing special education, what's 10% of 500? It's an easy one. Take off a 0. Yes, very good, 50-50. So if you have then 50 in each class, you have roughly about 200 students per school. So right now, your high school had about 200 students who were identified with special needs. Not with special needs, but identified that they could be in the special needs program, right? Right? Do like this. And in the just I'm not going to make you have it all memorized, but remember the largest category, learning disabilities. Second one, speech and language. Yeah. So let's say about 40% were out of those students, 40% are, it's roughly about 35% are have a learning disability. Now it can be mild, moderate, severe, and we'll talk about them more later. So 50% is about 100, so 40% is 80. So about 80 students at your high school had a learning disability, right? And if 10% were had autism, now we're talking about 10% of the 10%, right? That's about 20, right? Right? So we can just go start going down the, and it never felt, that's my point, Gio. It never felt like there was that many. Now, out of the 10%, now you have 200 students, only about 10% of those were in a special class. So over the course of a day, you may have one class of 20 that was, they had a homeroom where they all kind of like met up, and maybe they went into gen ed classes and came back, right? And we'll talk more about that when it comes to the IP and placement and whatnot. Some students, they were in gen ed classes and then just went to a different math class. So like I was taking, like when I was in the 10th grade, I was taking geometry, but I had seniors in my class. That's a little bit, that's a nice way of saying there's some remediation there. But we also called it, they were on the non-college prep path, right? That was kind of like, if you didn't pass whatever by the 10th grade, you're not going to college. Yeah, this is my friend who went to the military and got PTSD from the Desert Storm. Super fun, right? So what I'm trying to say is that these things are in plain, they're hiding in plain sight. Again, what does learning disability look like? I got one. Again, mine's mostly attributed to a brain injury when I was being born. Yeah. And it's very slight. It does show up when I'm super stressed. Yeah. But what does that look like? How many times have you seen somebody like park at Walmart and you're like, you got your blue placard? I bet you that's your grandma's. You don't have a disability. We can't see disabilities a lot of times. Just because somebody's in a wheelchair doesn't mean that that's their shtick. They might have some other things going on too. Whew. So this is what I'm trying to plant the seed. Now, again, let's factor in bias in there. Let's factor in racial inequality. Listen, I'm telling you, a number of years ago, I mean, Pete was like 3 or 4. So my best friend's house, we're in Chino, and she's white, husband's white. But her cousins are in from South Dakota. And I called Peyton a monkey, and they like gasped, like the record scratching, like they're like, you do know that Black people are not monkeys, right? I was like, pardon me, what? Well, Black people don't come from monkeys, right? You know that, right? I'm sorry, is this new to you? So there's still a weird kind of bias. There are still men on the planet who think women have smaller brains, right? And so it's a weird, there's a bias that comes on. Sometimes a male teacher might have a bias against certain things, like, right? Or if you have a girl who happens to have blonde hair and she's kind of like lost in her thoughts all the time, she probably has undiagnosed ADHD. And that happens too much. And we'll talk about that in the ADHD chapter. Yeah, I can give you guys a ton of examples that, oh, well, you know, she was such a good student. She never complained, and she sort of did her work on time, and she got C's. So good for her. She's just off in her own little world. She's just kind of a daydreamer, maybe an airhead. Like, there's these things. Now, conversely, I had a student in this class at Santa Ana College a number of years ago, a young man of African American, who was deaf and hard of hearing, and he had interpreters. Now, at night, it was a 3-hour class, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, right? They had to have 2 deaf interpreters show up to my class, right? Now, I don't have the bias that people who are hard of hearing don't use their brain. But I tell you what, this young man tried to break all the rules, bend all the rules, ask for extension, text me about, I pray that you give me a good grade, not show up, leave the deaf interpreters high and dry. Like, he was doing all the things that a normal student with neurotypicalness would get in trouble for, or just have a bad grade for. And this person was trying to work it a little bit. And I was like, okay, I have to make sure that my bias is not here. But listen, would I get mad at anybody pulling those shenanigans? Yes, I would. So I'm good. I had to document. And no, he did not pass the class. Just because you have a disability doesn't mean that you're going to pass the class. Doesn't mean I'm also not going to give you extra. Isn't that the point of it? Not having extra, but having equitable. Right. So there's a lot to be considered. Now, there are assessment teams who typically will sit with a child, and it's usually a school psych, a nurse that does, and we'll talk about this in the IEP. Well, they check your eyes and your ears, right? If you just need glasses or hearing aid, isn't that an easy fix? We don't need to go into special education program. You just get a tool, right? Or sit close to the glass. Let's get you large print. Let's get you an audio script. Yeah, it's this thing, right? We can troubleshoot this thing that helps students to be successful in equitable ways. However, assessment teams kind of sometimes have a bias. Listen, I've also had a bias. I worked with an Asian client, and she had a kind of a lower IQ. I'm going to say well, this is what the paperwork said. Her IQ said it was about 70. She was barely verbal, a lot of stems like this, barely talked, not very social, but had the dance revolution games or whatever, like the Wii dance moves memorized, like 17 different games she could do without the music, without the TV. She would just do it. Also, she could memorize things in a row. It was almost up to 100 things in a row without even seeing it. She would see it like 3 times and could recall it. And there's a savant piece there. That means they're splinter skill, and we'll talk about this in the autism chapter. And there's these little splinter skills where like so super smart in this one area, but over here not so much. Over here not so much, right? And so I had that bias too. Was like, her parents were sweet and she was sweet and she never really caused problems. She didn't hit anybody or bite or anything like that. And we all underestimated her. Oh, she has autism. She's not so smart. Even her parents. Oh, well, we just love her the way she is. There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes then we aren't that teacher who's asking the questions and having those high expectations. Unnecessary placement means there are students who may act a certain way or may not test very well, and they're automatically just like shuffled off to this 10%. That means, it doesn't mean they're, listen, I've had people in my classes who said, I was in special needs classes my whole life and I didn't know why. And it was just because they thought I was, because I was really quiet and they thought I couldn't talk. I had a girl, I think it was my first semester at SEC, red hair and freckles, last name Fernandez. And she said, I got put into special education before they even knew who I was because of the last name. And I wish that wasn't true, but it is true. Sometimes people just assume in certain respects, if you have a certain last name or a certain ethnicity, you are not smart. And that is not true.
Professor?
Yeah, jump in, Jesus.
I have something to add to that.
Please.
When I was in elementary school, they put me in ELD, I think it was called, or
English
something like
language
that.
learner, English language development. Yeah.
RSP or something like that. It was because English wasn't my first language, but I always spoke English much better than I knew Spanish, because the only Spanish I knew was from my parents, and they didn't come from like a big city in Mexico. They were from a small village, and so they only knew how to speak how they spoke over there.
Right.
But I've always known English much better.
Right.
And when I was put in that class, always reading those books, like I was so bored because they were just really simplistic, one sentence stories, and I was just,
And they
what am I
just
reading?
assumed, maybe you were like a little bit quiet, and maybe they just assumed that you
Mm-hmm.
were slow.
Exactly.
Do you feel like you got mistreated? Misplaced, at
A
least.
bit at first, yeah, but eventually they did give me more challenging stuff
Okay.
in that
Right.
class, and then I finally stopped going.
You're just like, thanks, no. And right, here's the thing we'll learn about next chapter about the IEP. It actually expires after 3 years. If you've met your goals and busted all those challenges, you don't need it anymore and you can be out. You could have maybe just had a 504 where they're just like, oh, let's keep an eye on them for a couple of years. And again, I have a friend whose child was born and he was a little bit different, and he was, you know, a few years ago, the diagnosis categories were a little bit different. So his was considered like developmental delay NOS, like not otherwise specified. And we thought, oh gosh, he's going to have a hard life, and he was a handful and this and that. No, he's 100% mainstream. He's in high school. He's just in a remedial math class, and they get a tutor for him. But we were all just like, oh gosh, I don't know how this kid's going to do, because he was off the rails. My kid's opposite now. He was like kind of a typical little kid, and then it's just been like like as society starts doing this, and it's hard to keep up as a teenager. It's just, but you never can guess just by looking at a person. You cannot guess by looking at a person. You can't. So this is the chart from the book, and I just pulled this right out of the book because I have the electronic copy. Again, so let's look at this here. Now, remind you, these numbers are really, really small because we're really only talking about 10% of the entire school. Now we're talking, all these numbers are within the 10%. Wait. Okay, so out of the total public school enrollment, we only have 1.5% that are American Indian or First Nation people, Alaskan Natives. All disabilities are roughly 1.5%. So this could mean 10% or 15% if you move the decimal point, right? So check this out. So out of this ethnic group of people, 2.8% of them learning disability, 2.4 speech or language, 1.3 intellectual disability, emotional disturbance, and autism. So if you add this all up, this should be 10%. I think it's 10%. Same here. Asians, 4.6 of the total public school enrollment. So if we have only like 5% of the Asian population is the total public school enrollment, we should have these numbers kind of looking the same. So what I'm saying is that out of maybe 10 kids at one school with autism, 1 is a First Nation person, 4 of them are Asian, but 13 of them are Black. And I know my numbers aren't really lining up right this second, but do you see how these numbers jump up? Why is it that we have 1.2 over here and 15.6%? Are we literally saying, okay, this is the total, that's the total population, but we're saying out of autism, like out of all the kids with autism, there is not quite a 1 over here in the Native column, but there's like 13 or 14 over here. For every 1 First Nation person, there's 13 students who are Black or African American and have autism. Now we haven't learned a whole lot about autism, but it's not genetic, right? It shows up anywhere, can look like anything and anyone. I can tell you right now in Peyton School, that's all children with autism. There's him and 1 other Black kid. That's it. 1. And there's only 100 students at that campus. So guess what? And the funny thing is out of 100 students, they all are identified with 1 or more disabilities. So we can't say only 10% of that campus. So it's 100% of that campus because it's a specialized campus. But when we say if the total public school enrollment is about 15%, out of 100 students, shouldn't there be 15 Black kids? Are we underrepresenting them then? Are Black kids? So like in Orange County, the Black or African American community is about 2%. We have kind of a small African American community. You'll see them in Riverside, Inland Empire, and Los Angeles. You won't see as much a bigger Black community in Orange County for a number of reasons, right? But look at this. So we're saying that of all the kids with autism, and again, autism is the equal opportunity, that 70% of them are white. Maybe not, right? So, and then 2 or more races. When we start breaking this down into like groups of like foster youth and stuff like that, we are going to see a really distinct, let me get out of there, a really distinct inequitable piece. And I'm only going to go for, wait, let's see here. So here's the data that you can look it up that's current. Sometimes I'm really fast with that, but overrepresentation means that there's too many of this one category in special education. They have, like, the managers at each district level have to look, and there's like coordinators and district representatives. They have to look across their entire program and say, are we saying there's more, like, is it disproportionately Black or Hispanic when those kids might not be identified? Now, let's talk about the overlying piece of families who advocate. Now, I obviously do this for a living. You bet I'm an like insane advocate. I'm not the normal mom by any means. I would say I'm the 1 in 10, right? So there are 9 other families who are lost in this system. I'm almost lost in this system, and I sort of know about it. If I didn't speak English very well, or I was taught to revere teachers and administrators, or somebody with a doctor out their last name, I would listen to every single thing they said, and I would never challenge them, and I wouldn't ask a question, and I'd be really hoping that the interpreter told me the right words, and my kid was getting services, and at the end I'd say thank you. But all the while, I'm getting manipulated and hosed. There's a lot of misrepresentation in special education. You will always, every once in a while, you'll get a mom who's like a Karen, like a white mom who's hyper pushing it, that kid is more disabled than they really are. Every once in a while, it's the mom with like the autism hat and the autism earrings and the autism shirt and the autism keychain and the autism shoes and the autism fanny pack. And you're just like, okay, hen, like there's a thing where you're like overdoing it. And we have to look at that kind of a little bit separately, right? But underrepresentation, it would be like when I'm talking about the girls. Girls are typically underrepresented in ADHD and autism, but they're going to be maybe more equitably represented in speech and language issues because you can hear it or see it. But at the same time, when you have a girl who talks like this for a really long time, my friend sister let her daughter talk like this until she was in the 6th grade because it was so cute. She was a baby, and her mom just really liked having a baby talk like this. Okay, if the parents don't sign for speech and language. Oh, by the way, she also had an eye. It's called I don't want to. It's not astigmatism. It's nibis. I forget what it's called. It's when your eye is not straight like this and one goes over here. Yeah, I got the surgery until like when she was like in, I think, 7th or 8th grade or something. It was like, you waited to get surgery for the eye. You got to do this stuff early. Early intervention counts. So you could have girls underrepresented. Trust me, I've met grown women with autism and I didn't even catch it. Didn't even catch it. Why? Because I value quirkiness and individuality and people who are smart women. So we all see things that we want to see, or we all see things that we don't want to see. And we sometimes our heads in the sand. But at the same time, the data is, this is what I would suggest for you guys to do. If we had more time, I would put us in breakout rooms and we would pull this up and I say, go pull up your high school. Like I'm telling you, I've looked at high school in our county where it says like the total population of this campus is like 73 African-American children, and 72 of them were in special education. Is it possible that that number is wrong? Yeah. And by the way, Jesus, English is hard. It's a weird language, and we take from everybody else and then we change the rules midstream. To measure somebody's IQ based on the English language is madness. And it's hard for kids to learn it. And guess what? They learn by exposure. And if you're not around parents who speak English well, like you're not exposed. It's the same thing as why I don't speak Spanish well. Like it's like still learning, but I'm not exposed to it. Oh, English, we mess it up all the time. We mess it up all the time. Let's talk about this. Cross-cultural dissonance talks about if I'm of one culture and then I have students of a different culture and I don't understand that culture. Teachers have always got to be mindful. In our program, where we have a mindful practice class, it's $297 if you're going to go for your permit. But if not, please take your training, get your CEUs. Always check yourself. Even if you are a person from Mexico and your family is from 17 generations from like Jalisco or Guadalajara or something like that, and then you are working with kids who are primarily their family is from that, and you guys live in the same neighborhood and you guys go to the same church and shop at the same stores, you still don't understand 100% what they're dealing with. Think of it this way. There are kids right now, take your age and minus 15. are those kids, technically they're in the same generation-ish, but are those kids learning the world the same way that you are? Nope. Those kids are getting grown up during a pandulce, man. It's like, even within 15 years, life is so different. Even with every year, things change. I mean, students in 2019 versus 2020 versus 2021, blarg. It's unbelievable, right? But again, make sure that you are being sensitive. We have a diversity class. If you're a child development major, please take our 221. That is my boss, African-American woman. A lot of rich stories to learn from her. She teaches the diversity class. But again, have you ever been called to the carpet by a teacher and they say, don't look down when I'm yelling at you, and you're like supposed to look at them, but if you did that to your grandmother, you would get in trouble? So we have cultural practices like, don't, I know kids who get uncomfortable and they smile when they're getting yelled at, and then you have a teacher going, that kid was being disrespectful, he was smiling at me when I was yelling at him. Well, first of all, maybe you need to yell at him. Number two, you need to know that culturally is appropriate. A child has anxiety, or that child was confused, or that child didn't even know what you were saying. So there's a lot of responsibility on the teacher. Again, you guys are on the planet longer. Hopefully you're neurotypical or have quirks that have like tools to help you, right? But we have to check ourselves. It's called reflective practice. I mean, there's points where I have to check myself. Did I say these instructions well? Did I explain myself well? Did I, like, oh my God, sound like a white girl the whole time? Like, these things can like push people away, right? I have to check myself. I know I talk fast, but I'm really, really excited about this. But these are some of the questions we strongly encourage. How does my race influence my work with my students, especially those whose race is different than my own? Now, while, like I said, I'm at the beginning of this, I'm a white girl and I'm fascinated and I love diversity. It doesn't mean that I'm ever going to understand it. Doesn't mean I'm ever going to understand it. I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. Again, I went to a very diverse schools my whole schooling. I appreciate that. My family is pretty diverse. I mean, my husband's sister married into a Japanese family. That's really interesting, being like the tallest woman in a family gathering, me being the tallest woman. And then even inside that group, they're saying, oh, like, oh, there's these types of Japanese and there's those types of Japanese. Like, wow, right? So we have to always be checking ourselves, right? What is the effect of my race on my thinking, beliefs, actions, and decision making? I tell you what, sometimes our self inquiry is not that clear, and some people are in denial about how their own stuff affects how they, right? So again, I'm teaching that trauma and resilience class on Wednesday nights, and we're hoping to have that every semester from here on out. And this is a piece where we talk about our own, not just race and gender, but how our own childhood trauma affects how we act with other people. Yeah. Okay, so question 3 and 4, hold on. How do I situate myself in the education of students? Do you need to learn about students? Yes, you do. Because they have stuff that's new to them that you don't know. And yes, you might be super techie and you might be super social media-y, but they got other stuff going on that's coming up behind you that you're going to, one of these days, you're going to say, oh, these kids today, it's going to happen because I hit that wall not too long ago, and we all hit that wall. But that's how generations work. Every generation that comes after always has newer, faster ways of doing things. I mean, just think about cars and power steering and power windows and whatnot. I don't have even a tape deck or a CD player in my car anymore, which my last car had both. And it wasn't that old, right? How do I negotiate the power structure in my class to allow students from all racial backgrounds to feel a sense of worth? Power structure? You betcha. Oh yeah. How do I situate and negotiate students' knowledge, experiences, and race with my own? Wow. Wow. And I have friends who are Indigenous or First Nation people who are preschool teachers, and it's really interesting to see how she tackles things. I just want to make sure we get through. Ooh, that's a little clip on McFarland, a little movie on Central California. And again, you guys can do that as your movie analysis, and I'll send that out pretty short. Culturally competent teachers. Again, we'll talk about how you can make sure that, and again, take the diversity class, because this is how you can show when you have posters on the wall, or you have main characters in books, or you can call on somebody. I remember my friend who is a teacher right now, her youngest son, ADHD, but that kind of like checked out type. The teacher wouldn't even call on that kid. Wouldn't even call on him. Well, and the teacher would say, well, he's going to get the answer wrong. Do you understand that that's okay? You don't want to call him extra and make him feel bad for answering it wrong. But every kid needs to be called on. And you know what? There's apps for that now, where your student's name goes in like a wheel, and you go like this, and you hit your wheel, and you can ask that student, and then their name comes out of the wheel. Please use it. And here's the LD or DLLs or ELD. I'm sorry, linguistically diverse is LD, but sometimes I'd rather use that for learning disability. But language minority students is similar concept. We don't say that anymore. Dual language learners, sometimes you have to, like Jesus said, like you have to have a foundation in your native language before you sometimes, and the pendulum swings back and forth on that. Sometimes they just say, no, let's put them in an English speaking class, get them up to speed, or no, let's get them a foundation in Spanish and then put them in the English speaking class, or let's do it two at the same time. That really depends on the school, the program, the district, the state. And again, the bilingual brain's always smarter, but it doesn't mean that each person's path is the same. Okay, and again, here's English learner and dual language learner. Now remember, these things right here, again, this is an intro class. We don't necessarily test the BICS, I'm sorry, or the CALB. That might happen on the assessment team, it might not, and I won't test you on this stuff. It just shows you that we are looking for classroom language. We're also looking for playground language, language with a teacher, or language with a peer. We've had students who sit in class and they're super quiet, and we just assume that they can't talk. And every time you ask them a question, they don't say anything. But out on the playground, they're absolutely 100% fluent in English and Spanish and what else. Kids are a lot smarter. Now, receptive language, remember this, receiving the message. Expressive language is, right. And when we talk about speech and language disabilities or differences, we'll talk about that. Some kids can't hear the message in the way that it shows up. This one has a receptive communication delay. He's the kid who's, because his brain kind of heard it, but he's processing 37 billion other things, right? And then expressive language, that's where when somebody doesn't get the message out. There could be a stutter, there could be a lisp, there could be whispering, there could be using the wrong words, and we'll talk more about that in that chapter. And again, here's second language acquisition. We don't need to talk too much about that. The BICS and the CALP, leave that to the school psych to do that one, right? And again, the programs for English learners are different, and you'll get whatever program you'll be in, they'll tell you this is how we do it. But it's up to you to know that maybe that student learns it. Does it learn that well? Does that student learn well that way, or do they learn better in a different format? It's interesting. We have to really look at these things. And again, sheltered instruction means, are we sheltering them away from the English language, and are we putting them in small groups? Are we, sheltered instruction versus immersion, right? And there are schools in the local area that do, 3 months of Spanish and 3 months of English and 3 months of Mandarin, like a dual immersion programs, right? So again, it really kind of depends on your program. But again, the bottom line here is that we cannot discriminate based on what somebody looks like or even what they sound like. Because just because somebody even has a stutter doesn't mean that that person has a low IQ or needs to be in special education services. And we'll talk next week more about qualifying for special education services, because you can assess a child 100% and they might not qualify. Or you assess a child, the whole team goes out there and gives them all the tests, and the parents say, no, thank you. Oof, there's a lot of variances. But again, from here, we'll talk more about the overrepresentation and underrepresentation as we go, because it's kind of like an underlying theme, right? Again, in any category, let's say we're talking about emotional disturbance, right? And we're going to have more girls in there because more girls are sad, girls that get depressed more, girls cut on themselves more. Or are we going to have more boys in there because boys are destructive and they're loud, which sometimes covers up depression? Technically, shouldn't it be equal gender-wise? Maybe, yes, maybe not in that school, but maybe over a municipality or a school district should be equal. right? Or traumatic brain injury. There are things where inequities are normal. Usually traumatic brain injuries, sorry guys, happen to guys. And why is that? You guys have all seen YouTube, right? Why do traumatic brain injuries happen more in men? I missed it, Jesus. You want to jump in again?
They're impulsive.
Yep,
They
absolutely.
do.
Absolutely. Impulsive, more physical, more active. Giovanni, we do dumb things. Yeah, I have yet to see the slip and slide off the roof by a bunch of girls. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's stuff like that, or like the shopping cart videos with a motorcycle in it. Like I've yet to see a bunch of women doing that. I'm not saying they don't, and TBIs can be from an accident, a car accident and whatnot, but there's the same thing we'll talk about as noise-induced hearing loss. More men have it. Well, we will talk about it in ADHD. Yes, more boys have ADHD, but that's not necessarily true. So there are some inequities that kind of hold fast, but yeah, like at Peyton School, 100 students, I think 10 of them are girls, so 10%. That's a little underrepresented. It's usually yeah, it's usually three, like 3 to 1. So usually like for every 3 boys, there's a girl. So it usually would be like 67% boys, about 30% girls. It's not. But then again, maybe they're being serviced elsewhere at a different school. Now, again, his school, we're in a situation where the school district pays. There are people who pay out of pocket to put their kid there. And so there are different ways kids come to that school. But, ooh, there's a lot here. There's a lot here. There's discrimination that still happens. And I wish that wasn't true. But that's why when we talk next week about the IEP, we have fail safes in the IEP. It gets renewed every 3 years. And if they don't qualify, they don't qualify. I've known kids who don't qualify because they sort of resolved into a place where they don't need the full gamut of services. They just need a couple of accommodations. Yeah. And that's, attributed to growth, maturity, your brain's getting stronger and things like that. Or maybe the stress that was happening at the time is not there anymore. Yeah. All right. That's my boss calling. All right. So I'm going to leave the last couple minutes up for, I'm going to stop the recording, but I'll leave the last couple minutes open for questions.